If you can share the most Gobar thing that you had to deal with, and I'm sure there must be a long list.
For me, it's really obvious. The thing that stands out and was the biggest professional mistake I've ever made in my life. And I did include it in my book, so I'm happy to share it on the podcast. But as I mentioned earlier, as the Indian team started playing better, people started noticing a different energy, a different spirit, a different vibe. The results started to turn in that sort of early 2008 after Gary and I had joined. And a lot of the media was talking about Guru Gary, and he's leading this revival of the new Indian cricket team. And as I'd mentioned, my friends and my mom at the time would say to me, Paddy, we're not hearing your name associated with anything that's happening here. And there was a part of me, and I know exactly what, but it was my ego that, yes, I would like to have had some recognition. But as I mentioned earlier, that my job wasn't to get recognition. My ego wanted it, but I know I'm not that effective when I'm operating out of ego. And then we got to play a series in South Africa. It was a Champions Trophy where all 8 teams up until that point would only played bilateral series against one nation. This was the first time we preparing for a ICC tournament. So a lot more effort went into it, and we were going to South Africa. So Gary and I were going to put our work on show in our home country. And as part of the preparation, I ran a number of workshops around some very different and what I felt interesting, and some of the players felt so as well, aspects of performance that's not traditionally covered. And we ran some fun workshops around diet and exercise and stretching and sleep and stuff like that. And one of the things that I'd heard about, and we've all heard about the fact that sometimes boxers and a Mike Tyson, they refrain from having sex for a week or 2 weeks out, and they say because it does stuff for their testosterone or their energy. And there's a whole lot of theories about it, but if you actually go and look, there isn't a real answer. So I went and I thought, well, let me go and have a look. What is the answer? And I found there are multiple answers depending which lens you choose to look at, whether it's a pure physiology, whether it's a biological lens. There's a lens from a Chinese medicine. They talk about chi energy. There's a hormonal, what happens with the testosterone. There's various spiritual angles that you can look at. So I looked at all of these perspectives and I presented a document that shared all of these, and it didn't direct players what to do or not. It was information. But in all the documents I presented, they were about 3 pages, because I know cricketers don't have that much of an attention span. And I know they're not going to read 3 pages of a diet or a fitness document. So I would put some humor and some tongue-in-cheek in between, just to try and keep their interest, because it was written just for the players. And we compiled some really nice glossy folders, and all of these documents went in. And as we arrived in South Africa, it occurred to me that there's really confidential information, and this actually comprises much of my work with the team is in this folder. And I thought about it, and I thought, it's been printed somewhere in India, in Mumbai, and the chance of it being leaked from that print shop is good. Then it's gone and sat in the BCCI office, and stuff is leaked from there all the time, or certainly was then. The players could leak things to their friends. It's the chance of a player leaving theirs in a hotel room or in a team room is very good. And there's always media people sweeping behind players to try and see is there some artifact or document or something written on the whiteboard from the meeting that they can get stuff from. So it occurred to me that this could get leaked. So I chose to leak that document to a journalist, an Indian journalist who I knew had formed a relationship with. And my understanding and anticipation was that he would use that information and write about this fantastic work that Paddy Upton's doing in the engine room of the Indian cricket team. That was going to be and it was going to be published when we were in South Africa and in South Africa. And I woke up the next morning and I turned my phone on and it just went beep, 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 beep. And I realized, okay, something's happening. And one of the first messages I read was, is everything okay? Have you seen the news? And I turned the TV on, and there splashed all over the news and all over the channels and on TV was that Gary Kirsten is encouraging the Indian players to have sex in order to improve their performance when they're on tour. And even if they haven't got their wives with them on tour, they must still go out and find somebody. And this is their new performance enhancing strategy for the Champions Trophy. And the article said Gary Kirsten had said that. And it absolutely devastated me how those tongue-in-cheek comments were taken completely out of context and not attributed to me, attributed to Gary, who I'd spent at that time maybe, I don't know, a year and a half doing everything I could to support him to be the most effective coach he could be. I was his wingman. And now, acting out of self-interest, I had caused Gary in Indian cricket severe damage. Now, Gary is a reborn Christian. He's married to a girl whose father is one of the most well-known Christian evangelists, not just in South Africa, through Africa. So it had brought immense disgrace to his community, this article. In an Indian context, it's not something that is spoken about, and certainly not in 2009. Gary actually went and tendered his resignation letter should the BCCI need a scapegoat. I remember arriving at practice that morning and I was quite stunned and not sure what to do. I went to Gary and I said, Gary, it was me. And I told him why I had done it. So I owned up and I came clean, and Gary said, we'll deal with it later. The players don't need to know. So you don't have to, that doesn't need to happen. And I remember at practice, Sachin called the whole team in before practice started, and he doesn't do that kind of thing. And he was quite angry, and he looked at us in the eyes and he said, guys, somebody here has leaked this document. Somebody's done this, and it's hurt our coach and it's hurt our team, and it's distracting us from this tournament before we started a game. And he carried on talking. I don't know what he said because every word was like an arrow through my heart because I was that guy who had done it. And I remember getting home from that practice. I don't remember much about the practice. I was just devastated and trying to put on a front that everything's sort of okay. And Gary's wife was waiting for us at the hotel, standing there looking quite distraught to support him. And I remember walking up to her with tears streaming down my cheeks and just stumbling out this really tearful apology. I said, I'm so sorry. It was me who's done this. And fortunately, how did we turn that around? Well, number one, the players didn't need to know. It was only later that I'd owned up to it. Because of Gary and my relationship, I don't know, I probably would have done it with another coach, but it made it easier. I knew I had to own up fully to what I'd done and why I'd done it, and not try and hide, duck and dive, because that would just have kept it alive for me in my head and in my heart. And Gary, fortunately, through who he is as a person, he had the capacity to genuinely forgive me for making the mistake that I made. In the media, we owned up and said, this isn't a document that Gary prepared, it's a document that I prepared. So I took the responsibility in the media, and 2 or 3 days later, there was a lot of accusations that I had said this, and I got a lot of criticism for it. And when I look back on that, and I realized it at the time, and it is still as fresh for me today, is the lesson for me is in a leadership position, when we act out of self-interest, we are maximally ineffective. My job that I'd done really well until that moment, was to focus on serving the people, the team, the system that I was charged to focus on, to help them learn, grow, develop, perform, and make it about them. And that's what great leadership is. It's recognizing that I have this privileged position and my focus is to help other people learn, grow, and develop, and serve the system or the environment or the business of the team that I've been given the privilege of serving in this position. And subsequent to then, it was the biggest gift for me, because if ever I feel myself wanting to do something for myself and my own self-gain, I remember that incredible hurt that was just compounded from when I saw the media to when I apologized to Gary to when Sachin spoke to us to when I was crying outside the bus, trying not to the players see me crying, saying sorry to Gary's wife. That pain was so bad that it's quite difficult for me now to have my ego take control. I can see it when it comes up. I reel it in. And that was my gift, is my role is to serve other people, not to serve myself. And in doing that really well, I get to sleep well at night.
How did you eventually settle this, if I can say this, or kind of concluded this with Gary? How did this finally?
I don't know how Gary processed it necessarily, but what I made sure that I did at the time was, as I mentioned earlier, be fully honest with the fact that I did it, why I did it, and be really sincere in my apologies. And it was as I said, it was the biggest mistake I've ever made professionally. The pain, the emotional pain and disappointment in myself. And if the articles came out that I had said that, it would have been easier to handle than them going out and say Gary did it.
Yeah.
So that made the pain so much worse, that I'd hurt somebody else. And I guess intuitively, it wasn't a decision I made. I knew I had to go into the pain, go into the discomfort. And as tempting as it was to avoid it and not go there and not tell the truth. And if I didn't say something, there's a good chance it would never have come out that it was me.
Yeah.
But it would have eaten me up from the inside. And I have done, in my past, I have done things wrong and not owned up to it or kept it quiet. And I know I'm the person who gets eaten up, and it stays with me. So I'm very glad that I managed it the way I did. And I spoke to Gary, maybe 2 years later, and asked him what his experience. And interestingly, he said he was able to move on and let it go fairly quickly. I held on to it for longer. And, I have told that story in a small handful of sort of intimate talks that I do to some clients where I've got a good relationship and I feel comfortable enough. I remember the first few times I couldn't tell it without being very tearful, the emotions coming up and the pain coming out. It still does. And to be honest, it's not comfortable sitting here sharing that story because knowing strangers are going to listen to it. It would be much easier not to share the story.
Not to share the story.
Because it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel comfortable. And I know there's people who are going to judge me in a bad light for the fact that I did that. But I guess, again, why do I say it? Do I tell the story because it makes me feel better each time I say it? Or I think maybe there's real value there. And, I was gifted that Gobar moment in a way.
Yeah.
And I share that shit now, hopefully that other people can learn from it.